I think this evening or this afternoon somehow hallmarks the beginning of the Masanga Medical Research Unit. Now, I'm a medical doctor by training. I studied medicine to become a tropical doctor. As we don't have a tropical medicine doctor education in Germany, I thought I'll learn a lot of things before I go into the tropics, and accidentally it became an academic career. I'm an internist, infectious disease, tropical medicine specialist now at the University of Amsterdam, but as I have the tendency to continue working with my former colleagues, the list of affiliations is growing. Where do we come from with regard to the unit? Actually, I'm coming from the Academic Medical Center. I put all this text there because it's not as nice as the medical library of the University of Lund. In a nutshell, it simply says that it's a big academic hospital, the other one in Amsterdam. We take care for about 17,000 travelers per year going to the tropics, and we take care for the 1,700 or so per year which return ill from the tropics. And apart from that, of course, we look for infectious disease patients on the wards. We do a lot of training, and we engage in research. That's it, basically. The clinical research, most of it takes place in Africa, actually. I do have a large group of PhDs, 25 at present. More than half of them are from African countries. They work all over the place on various issues: echinococcosis in Sudan, malaria and sickle cell disease in Ghana, many other things, but the main centers are one in Malawi, where a colleague of mine conducts malaria control studies. I have a big group in Cape Town where we work on TB and HIV issues. Lambarene, the old Albert Schweitzer hospital, is where I do most of my work in malaria, co-infections, HIV and other things. And now here we have added the Masanga Research Unit. Much of our research is a broad field of, as our patients come with a lot of ailments, we also address lots of research topics, actually, and as academics do, we also generate a lot of input. We use research for several things. One is particularly training. Most of our research is really carried out by young physicians, young doctors, trained by my seniors and myself, actually. We do think, actually, that the philosophy behind good research, at least that is what drives me, is that clinical research, and Marcus expressed something like that as well already, clinical research and related activities are a formidable tool to strengthen capacity, to empower people, and to really directly improve health. This is what I think should drive clinical research. And rather than only talking about plans for the research unit, I think much of this we have already heard. This is a fantastic group with people from different trades, actually, but I thought I pick 2 or 3 examples to quickly highlighting that it can really be done, that you can use clinical research to improve health, actually. The first stop is in South Africa, Johannesburg. It's 2005. The country is rife with the HIV epidemic. 40 out of 100 people are in some parts of the city infected with HIV, and where there is HIV, there is drug-resistant tuberculosis. In 2006, news hit the world that out of 53 patients in a rural hospital in South Africa, 52 died within 16 weeks from XDR-TB. And being in the front line in Johannesburg, the Ministry of Health approached me and said, I was at that time head of infectious diseases at the University of the Witwatersrand, and they approached me and said, listen, we don't want a public health disaster as with AIDS. You tell us what we have to do, you'll get the funds, and we'll get it done together. So what had to be done, and that was hard for me as a tropical medicine specialist, was to turn this 268-bed hospital for tropical diseases into a mere hospital where we did not see anything else rather than M and XDR-TB patients with high resistance levels. Now, how do you avoid spread of the disease? Actually, it's not possible to put everybody in single isolation. So what we did is we grouped patients together by resistance patterns of their bugs. So those who had the same resistance patterns were placed in the same rooms, actually, and by this we pressed the infection level to almost 0, actually, by implementing very, very simple technical tools, we made sure that our staff actually, which to 30% was also HIV positive and should theoretically not work in such a setting, actually that none of the staff developed X and MDR-TB. At that time, the mortality rate was about 100% for XDR-TB patients by simply pooling our knowledge, by using the old drugs in the best possible way. We managed to press that down to 25%, still far too much. But what we used in parallel is what we tried is I established at the same time a clinical research unit. And at that time, for the first time in 25 years, you all have to come down because I can see it here on the screen actually. For the first time in 25 years, we had a chance to develop novel anti-tuberculosis drugs. And we jumped onto this train, contributed to a multi-center study for betaquilin, which is one of the two TB drugs which in the end have then within 2 to 3 years reached clinical use. So this was how we used a clinical situation to also build research capacity, and betaquilin is now a drug which is used for XDR TB patients actually. Now this is one example how you can directly use clinical care or clinical research also to improve clinical care. Another example which is close to my heart because I worked there since 25 years is Lambaréné. We heard already from Noemi, who worked also there, actually something about it. We stick with tuberculosis. If you look at the map, the global map for tuberculosis epidemiology is getting better by the year, but there are still some gray areas where we are totally ignorant of the situation. And as small countries matters, I began to build, together with the team, of course, a tuberculosis laboratory in Lambaréné. Now this is Lambaréné, the old Albert Schweitzer hospital, from the air. This is it from the water. This is where Albert Schweitzer worked until 1965. And the research laboratory, probably as it will go in Masanga, we started here 27 years ago in this garage. Then we expanded it here, and now on the other side of the hospital, we have a large research unit where more than 250 to 300 people work. Most of them are local people. So we started with 3 or 4 expats, like we are now starting here with a group mainly from northern countries, but over 10, 15, 20 years, one should be there that it's predominantly local people who run the show. Actually. Now, tuberculosis, this started as malaria research unit, classical tropical medicine research, first malaria and then all the other ailments. So we started building TB capacity. TB is very difficult with regard to laboratory techniques, equipment, etc. It took us 7 years to get there, to get the laboratory running. The first thing we did is we did an epidemiological study in the area, and I must say, even to my surprise, we unearthed a X and MDR-TB epidemic, which is as bad as in South Africa. The only difference being that when there are 10 in 100 patients infected in Johannesburg, then it means thousands of people. And the problem here is such an epidemic is barely neglected because overall there are only 2 million people in the country, but still 10% of all TB patients have MDR-TB. This is a powerhouse for trouble, actually. And we showed genetically that there are rapidly spreading clones which are able, if you don't treat the disease properly, very quickly. Now, the classical problem is when you start doing research, you unearth a problem. But the point is, you need then to use your clinical research to change policy and to improve care. What did we do? We did a couple of things. We published a series of papers on the dimension of the problem, no access to second-line drugs, nobody really caring for TB in children. And then we invited the Ministry of Health, did a symposium with them, and probably because we have the credibility earned in other areas, they were listening very carefully. And the government helped us actually to set up the first and only MDR-TB treatment unit in the whole country. We teamed up with them, applied for funds with the Global Fund, actually, we were asked to become the reference laboratory for tuberculosis for the whole country. And yeah, we were very successful in starting treating patients. In the beginning, it was just me on the phone or there every 4 or 5 weeks and advising my colleagues. By now, we do have 3 fully fledged doctors who are perfectly able to treat, local doctors to treat MDR-TB. And in the end, just from beginning, by setting up a laboratory, by doing epidemiological studies, by characterizing strains molecularly, we convinced the whole country, or we convinced the state of Gabon to heavily invest in that. We also had to drag WHO on our side when we started working with that. The WHO treatment policy for MDR-TB was 20 months. And this was far too long, totally unrealistic. So we tried to establish a 9-month regime. WHO said we can't allow that because that's not standard. So we said, okay, we'll do it as a study. And at that moment, WHO said, no problem. If it's a study, then it's not a problem. And this is the strength of building research units. You are allowed to change, or you are driving the development, actually, which then in the end becomes implemented. And the 8-month regime, not due to our activities, is by now a global standard for the treatment. So even in remote areas, you become front runners. Now, what brought me personally to Sierra Leone? Actually, very, very much so. This was to remember the big outbreak 2 years ago with an incredible havoc wreaked on the 3 West African countries, Sierra Leone, Guinea, and Liberia, actually. And precisely the same story as you told us about Masanga happened 50 kilometers down or up the dirt road, actually, in Yele Hospital. And what happened in Yele was that as well, there was 1 or 2 cases of Ebola. The hospital run by Dutch doctors had to be closed. They were repatriated against their will, actually. And because I'm training Dutch Tropenarzen on viral hemorrhagic fevers and others, one of them called me from quarantine and said, Martin, would you be willing to help us to try to reopen this hospital as soon as possible? The epidemic is going on, but we need to keep this hospital open. I was more than happy to do that. This is Dr. Erdi Hausenger, the physician in Yele, Jacob van der Ende, another doctor, here one Nick Swinkels, the 3 doctors, 3 of the heroes, like in Masanga, who stayed there, who wanted to keep the show going. And if you look, we revamped the hospital then in a way which made it possible to function as a holding center. Holding centers are structures where patients who are suspected of having Ebola are kept until and cared for until they are diagnosed, and they might then be transferred to a treatment center. And the biggest challenge was to keep the rest of the hospital open. So in the Ebola tents, we were keeping, or they were keeping, surgical patients, and we managed to keep this hospital open and to continue running surgery, gynecology. I can't explain it now in detail because we don't have the time, but we happened, actually, this is how the unit looked like everything, but we happened that way to reverse the Ebola effect. And what we see here is the terrible story which happened everywhere in Masanga and else. People stop going to the hospital because the hospitals are those places where most people are infected. People are detained rather than helped. That was the perception. So, and then when we reopened the hospital safely, still very much in the outbreak, the normal hospital services were maintained whilst we were screening for Ebola patients. You can't see it very well, but we do have 22 red stripes in about 900 patients which were screened, 22 Ebola patients out of 900 submitted, and right in the middle of the outbreak when many other structures could unfortunately not maintain their services, the hospital was going through. Also, this can be used for clinical research, actually, and we are currently writing up a publication where we hypothesize that the current WHO CDC standard case definition is well if it is applied to people in treatment centers. But if we consider patients who are not febrile as primarily not suspect of Ebola, and at present fever is one of the key features, then we miss out on many cases. And so we are proposing now in a research paper, which we hope will be published soon, that for holding centers, in order to keep hospitals open, you can do this safely, but you have to expand your case definition and take care of those patients, account for those patients who don't run a fever. I don't have the time to go into detail. We want, in principle, talk about the research unit, but I just wanted to show that research, training, it all goes together. And I had very, very many frustrated students who said, we want to go to Sierra Leone and elsewhere and work against the Ebola epidemic. And of course, one should only do that when the situation is safe, and you also have to have certain skills. So we try to channel all the energy, and together with Joyce Brown, actually somebody from the same unit as Marcus, actually pushed me as long until I succumbed to the pressure, actually, and I agreed that we would do a massive open online course for Ebola, quite an undertaking because I was the only senior on the team, but we had 8, 9, 10 PhD students of mine whom we allotted particular themes to, and we came up with a massive open online course. As part of this course, Médecins Sans Frontières showed or put a video online how one constructs a holding center. There are lots of reports from Masanga, how you keep such a hospital open. And this is just an amazing success. I can't believe it, but by now more than 10,000, now it's 10,600 people from around the world who are either deliberately or because they are forced, so because they are just there, actually have to treat Ebola patients. And I think a massive open online course is by far not as sophisticated as the amazing work Jochen told us about, but it's also a method to learn about this, and it put Yale Hospital really on the global map because it features prominently in here. But this is the past, and I think I just wanted to show that clinical research really can make a difference, and the question is, how do we now implement all these fantastic ideas, this work, how do we take it from there? And what do we have actually is, Noemi showed this already, we have already started just by turning really simple observations, everyday clinical work which comes our way in tropical countries, by turning this into clever reports, may be so important that even the Minister of Health of a country gives his signature and says, we really need to work on those things. And this is the power of clinical research. You don't even need to wait until you have very sophisticated laboratories and hundreds of people, actually. Now, what do we need in order to do all this, actually? We need, unfortunately, a little bit of structure, but the idea of the research unit is to be a platform, which has been said before. I think the really unique situation is almost unique on the continent. In Africa, situation is that so many people from so many different trades address the most pressing issues. Many of the tropical research units of note have evolved from the field of tropical parasitic diseases. The 4 or 5 biggest centers still focus mainly on infectious diseases. And here, all of a sudden, there is a group of people who address surgical questions, gynecology, obstetrics, and we bring some internal medicine to the party. I think this is a fantastic platform. We need a little bit of infrastructure in terms of written things. Peter and I, we came up with a memorandum of understanding and a foundation document which we signed actually, and the MMRU, the research unit, will be probably be the 4th leg or grow into the 4th leg of the Masanga Hospital Rehabilitation Project. It's very important to keep it different from the hospital, because should anything go wrong with the research unit, then that should not negatively impact on the hospital. This is theoretical, but it's very important. So it's not a hospital, but it's part of the rehabilitation project, and the idea is to work together together with all academic and non-academic institutions worldwide which want to do something, actually. Now we want to bundle things in a way. We want to safeguard quality standards to that end. We are at present designing a research unit board, a scientific board. Actually, the research unit board consists of Peter as a mastermind behind the foundation, myself as the designated director, and of course, last but not least, the current chief medical officer, which is Jonathan. And the scientific board will consist of a mixture of senior and younger investigators. Noemi, for example, we would like to have on board, and many others, plus representatives of the major groups which are now here. And the task of the scientific board will be to do very, very simple assessments of the proposed research, to check its feasibility, to make sure protocols are well designed, that the research is feasible, and that it really serves the primary purpose of being of use for the local population. Also very important is one should never ever do clinical research without an ethics committee. When it comes, we are a fledgling unit, we have not even started yet to function as a unit. Of course, there are the institutional boards of the universities which send out people, and for certain research intervention studies where we are far from at present, one would approach the national committee. But what we really need, and I'm currently busy, or we are doing, laying the foundations for this, actually with the help of the Lambarene Ethics Unit, to establish a local ethics committee where community members, people from the hospital, look at proposals from a layperson and a professional point of view. Is this research ethical or not? Actually, that's very important, and we are busy doing those things. Now, projects and partners, as you have seen, there are already a multitude of things going on. The strength is the incredible multidisciplinarity, and our task will be to encourage and assist with ongoing projects and develop an overarching strategy in line with our mission statement, which is to serve the local people, actually. And yeah, we want to conduct this research to strengthen capacity, to empower the people, and to directly improve health. Now, what are the concrete plans? We are going to establish now over the next couple of weeks the scientific review board. We implement an institutional review board or ethics committee. We want to prepare for a couple of ambitious internal medical projects. A large fever study is what I envisage, and what I would like to embark on quite soon, because that would also help to strengthen our laboratory, to look systematically at the reasons of febrile disease, or the origins of febrile disease. Actually, there is a lot of opportunity, and we have already begun to write a huge proposal for this, to improve the laboratory structure by putting simple diagnostic devices for important febrile diseases to the test. What we would like to do, or what I would in particular like to do, is to not only capitalize on all the massive knowledge accumulated and brought to the party by the northern partners, but with others and myself having extensive networks within Africa, we would like to also haul in experts and colleagues from other African centers to help setting things up, such as Lambarene. And of course, in 10 years' time, or hopefully earlier, half of the room should be filled with local colleagues who have been trained and use the opportunity, and with local, I mean African colleagues, of course, to get the thing really going. And of course, unfortunately, our task will also be to look for funds and to offer opportunities for all these people. And with this, I'd like to finish. Thank you very much.